For about a year now, I've been continuing to dive deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of alternate versions of Star Wars, and after making 3 videos on the topic, I am still finding new versions of these movies.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
That's good news.
We all know that the Phantom Menace was converted to 3D and re-released in cinemas in February of 2012. But did you know that there was actually plans to release 3D versions of all 6 films in the original saga in the 2010s? Well, actually, yeah, you probably all knew that. My dumbass just found out the other week. I mean, look, of course I knew that episode 1 came out in 3D. I saw the posters for it at the cinema when it originally came out. But when Lucasfilm announced that they would be converting the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy to 3D in 2010, I didn't really keep up with this stuff. Look man, I was too busy watching Clone Wars and Earth's Mightiest Heroes, okay? I was happy. The original plans for this 3D re-release was to release a film each year, starting with episode 1 in 2012 and finishing with episode 6 in 2017. This release schedule was then altered, bumping up episodes 2 and 3 to instead release back to back in September and October respectively in 2013. Judging by that abrupt decision to move up the release schedule, it was clear that things were already starting to fall off the rails before the 3D Star Wars re-release were indefinitely postponed in January 2013. It definitely didn't have anything to do with the fact that Disney bought Lucasfilm a few months earlier. What? Disney cancelling a Star Wars project? Pfft, no way, that would never happen. How could you even suggest such a thing? It's widely believed that the story of the original saga in 3D ended with the Lucasfilm buyout, but there is more to the story than you have been led to believe. So what really happened here? What's the real story behind the cancelled 3D release of the original Star Wars saga?
That's why I'm here.
Let's go back to the beginning, to a time before Disney owned Star Wars. Yippee! But first, let's get something out of the way. While it was announced that all 6 films were going to be converted to and released in 3D, the 3D conversion was not completed for every film before the project was cancelled. Episode 1 was obviously finished and released, but what about the other 5? Well, we know for certain that episode 2 and 3 were fully converted to 3D, we'll talk about those 2 later. As for the original trilogy, despite rumours that there was a completed 3D conversion for episode 4, none of the films have a finished 3D conversion. It's possible that some work was done on episode 4, but it clearly was not finished. So, to be perfectly clear, 3D versions of all 3 prequel films exist, but a 3D version of the original trilogy does not exist.
Impossible. Perhaps the archives are incomplete.
In 2010, it was announced that all 6 Star Wars films were to be theatrically re-released in 3D, starting with The Phantom Menace in 2012, with the other 5 films releasing in order at the same time the following year. The reactions to this announcement were mixed, to say the least. Some fans were excited at the prospect of seeing all 6 films on the big screen again, while others continued to bash George Lucas for rushing out what seemed to be another lazy cash grab. It didn't help that they were starting with The Phantom Menace either.
George Lucas raped our childhood. George Lucas raped our childhood.
You've got to remember, this was way before Disney got their hands on Star Wars. During this era, fans were relatively happy with the state of the franchise. The only negativity towards Star Wars was generally just aimed at George Lucas because he wouldn't stop tinkering with the movies. We had The Force Unleashed and Clone Wars, okay? We were happy. This is nothing compared to the hatred that the current state of the franchise stirs up now. And yes, this whole Star Wars in 3D thing was George Lucas's idea. He was still running the show back then. So why did he want to do this? Well, at the time, 3D was seen as the next evolution in the theatrical experience. It was Avatar. It's It's because of Avatar. The only reason we still have 3D movies is Avatar. It made 3D look like the next big thing, and the only good 3D movie to come out since then is Avatar: The Way of Water. You know why the 3D effects in Avatar are so good? Because it was shot specifically for 3D. To make the Star Wars films 3D, they had to be post-converted to 3D way after their initial release. The 3D conversions of the prequel films were not done in-house by ILM. They were done by a company called Prime Focus, who appear to be one of the leading industry companies for post-3D conversion. I mean, they have a pretty impressive resume. Again, I can't escape this franchise. The conversion was at least supervised by ILM, specifically by John Knoll. There's not a lot to talk about with regard to this process. It's by no means a simple one, but it basically just involves adjusting picture depth. With these releases, George Lucas didn't even want certain elements just flying out of the screen. He just wanted to focus on adding more depth to the image. Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace 3D made its way into cinemas in February 2012, and the reactions were definitely mixed. Reviews of the 3D transfer ranged from "it's fine" to "appalling," and most people reported that the transfer was extremely flat for a 3D release. By the time the re-release finished showing in cinemas, it had earned a respectable $100 million worldwide, taking the film's overall worldwide takings to over $1 billion, although Lucasfilm had hoped the re-release would perform better, making Episode 1's 3D debut a disappointment. Now fans had to sit back and wait for Episode 2 in 3D in 2013, but they received a much welcomed surprise a few months later when it was announced that Episode 3 in 3D would also be released in October 2013, only 1 month after Episode 2's updated release date of September 2013. But then something awful happened.
Today, I am proud to announce the Walt Disney Company is acquiring Lucasfilm, the global...
This fucking deal ruined everything. I'll never forgive you for canning 1313, Disney.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
Long story short, Disney bought Lucasfilm and went on to cancel pretty much every Star Wars project in development and then announced Star Wars Episode 7. The 3D versions of Star Wars also got tossed, with Disney announcing in January 2013 that they were postponing the 3D releases of Episode 2 and 3 to focus their efforts on Episode 7. And while I do believe that was part of the reason as to why they cancelled these releases, it's not the whole story. While Disney did buy the rights to Star Wars when they bought Lucasfilm, 20th Century Fox, back when they were still an independent company, still owned the distribution rights to the original 6 films. So if Disney wanted to continue the 3D Star Wars re-releases as they were originally planned, then they would have had to distribute the movies through Fox, which was just out of the question. If you ask me, that's why Disney cancelled the 3D re-releases. To be clear, the films were only officially postponed, not cancelled, but there hasn't been any word on any more 3D versions of Star Wars since the postponement, and it's safe to assume that these 3D releases were quietly scrapped years ago at this point, with the Phantom Menace remaining as the only 3D Star Wars film from the original saga to be released. Well, theatrically, at least.
What?
Remember how I said that Episode 2 and 3 had complete 3D conversions? Well, fans were shocked when in January 2015 it was announced that all 3 Star Wars prequels would be screened in 3D at Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, running from April 16th to 19th. In fact, all 6 Star Wars films were screened at the celebration in anticipation of The Force Awakens releasing later that year, except of course the original trilogy was presented in standard 2D. So yes, the 3D versions of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, wow. So yes, the 3D versions of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith were publicly screened for a few days in 2015 for the first and last time. If you were among the lucky attendees at Star Wars Celebration that year, you officially got to watch Star Wars movies that no other mass audience had ever seen before or since. The reviews for the 3D conversions of episode 2 and 3 were generally more positive than those for episode 1. A review I read did mention that these films were projected in less than optimal circumstances, making the shortcomings of these conversions much more noticeable. Regardless, the general consensus is that these conversions are cool, but don't add a lot to the experience. Big action sequences play well, but the small details in the more low-key scenes don't really do much to impress. I also, of course, have to mention that the only reviews for the episode 2 and 3 conversions are from die-hard convention goers, so they would be much easier on these films compared to your standard run-of-the-mill film critic. None of the completed 3D prequel films have ever been screened since. These versions didn't even get a 3D Blu-ray release, which quite frankly is shocking. Apparently there was a rampant rumor in 2016 that Disney was actually going to release a 3D prequels Blu-ray box set around the same time that The Force Awakens was going to be released on 3D Blu-ray in the lead up to the release of Rogue One. There have also been listings for 3D Blu-rays for all 6 original Star Wars films on places like Amazon for years, but these really don't mean anything at this point because they've just been sitting there for years. These are all just rumors, of course, but Disney is once again missing out on a chance to print money by not releasing another new version of Star Wars. Disney have the 3D masters of all 3 prequel films. We know this for a fact. They showed them at Star Wars Celebration, but it looks like Disney just has zero interest in releasing these versions.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
The Phantom Menace is coming back to theaters this year for its 25th anniversary, and as far as I know, it's only being shown in 2D. So yeah, I think Disney have forgotten about these 3D versions, but you know, stranger things have happened. Personally, I would love to see these versions just out of pure curiosity, and I'm still holding out hope that it might happen one day. I didn't even see episode 1 in theaters, man. I missed out on the lot.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault.
So, what do you guys think? Did you manage to see any of these re-releases? Would you like to see them? Is a 3D version of the original trilogy something you are interested in? Let me know in the comments. Till next time, guys. Look after yourselves, and as always, I'll see you all in the next video.